What is up? Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful day. Back here with some Dead Space Remake, Resident Evil 2 Remake, and Silent Hill 2 Remake gameplay for you. Because today I'm going to be comparing all three of them and trying to figure out which one is the overall best remake. Now, once again, this is my opinion. This is not objectively speaking. This is subjective. So it's how I view and see things. And I try to make this as fair and unbiased as possible. Once again, everyone is different. So please try not to kill me at the end of this. But regardless, as I said, I picked these three survival horror titles because all three of them have remakes. They're from three different franchises, and I think not 100%, but for the most part, they are relatively very comparable, being more, I guess, pure horror with some elements of action, but more on the horror side of the spectrum. But nonetheless, I'm going to try to figure out which of these three games is overall the better remake, because I think all three of them are excellent at what they do. They're all three have their differences. They have some similarities, but overall, I think all three of these games, they had big shoes to fill. And I think overall, and based on reception and reaction from fans as well as reviews, I think they have proven that all three of them have been extremely successful in that regard. But how do I determine which one is the best, in my opinion? So here I picked 5 categories to judge these three games on. And these categories are based on the quality of how the remakes did. So things such as like story, characters, or even combat are not going to be categories on this list because they're not going to be completely different things. These are remakes, not brand new games. So we kind of already know the story and the characters. There might be a few minor differences or deviations, but at the end of the day, it still gets back to square one, just taking maybe some alternate paths. But I wanted to just see how the remakes did, how they took an existing thing and how they maybe enhanced it, did it differently, did it for good or for bad, and wanted to see how they compare each other. So my 3 categories are horror presentation, basically how did the remakes present their horror elements, faithfulness to the original, because I know a lot of people get really leery and anal about that, new additions, how did the new things these games shape up to be, replayability, a game is only good if you have a lot of chances to keep constantly playing it over and over and over again. And my last one is challenge. Does it have a satisfying challenge as well as the reward for that challenge? Those 5 categories are how I'm going to judge which of these 3 remakes that I think is overall the best. So without further ado, let's get right into this whole ordeal with the first category being horror presentation. Dead Space Remake, once again, is one of those games where I've said it before and I'll say it again. The ship, the Ishimura, is kind of like its own entity. It's kind of like a living being itself. You can call it maybe the ultimate enemy because this ship comes to life, and how it's presented in this remake is absolutely spectacular. The lighting, the sound, the picture, the graphics, everything has just been perfectly enhanced. It's taken everything from the original one and just enhance it to our qualities of today's technology and stuff like that. So, as I said before, the Ishimura is like a living entity, and this game perfectly showcased that in so many ways. I mean, you never quite feel comfortable playing this game knowing that anything at any time can come out, but it just looks and sounds so much more divine. So they basically took everything that was great about the original one and enhanced it. I'm always having that creepy, forbidding feel whenever I play Dead Space Remake. Resident Evil 2 Remake is much the same. It took Raccoon City and basically brought it into our cutting-edge technology days back in 2019, and it still looks and feels absolutely amazing. Walking through the city, going to the RPD, just seeing the enemies, having all the sounds, and how the graphics look, the lighting, the darkness, everything just feels like you are stuck in a zombie apocalypse hell, and I absolutely love it. So with Resident Evil 2 Remake, I don't have any complaints at all on how they elevated the horror and presentation. It's once again a foreboding, just pure terror experience that you have to experience firsthand to really understand how great it's done. But unfortunately for these 2 things, I ultimately think they fall just a little bit short compared to the one I'm going to give the ultimate point to, and that is with Silent Hill 2 Remake. Now, Silent Hill 2 Remake, much like the other 2 games, delivers its atmosphere dead on, whether it's in the fog or you're in one of the hotels or the hospital. You always have that creepy atmosphere. But I said that about the other two games. So what does this one do differently, a little bit differently, to give it the edge? I said it in my review, and I think it's the ultimate thing that won me over in this game, is the sound. The sound is so divine. The sound effects combined with the already great music really make this, that gives it the edge it needs. I recommend you playing this on headsets, and let me tell you something, that's radio coming through your PS5 controller. I'll be honest with you, I think it's easier to have without the radio, because with it on, even though it alerts you of an enemy nearby, it really puts you in a very uncomfortable spot. I never got comfortable no matter how long I played this game, and that sound effect I think gives it the edge. So I give the point here to Horror Presentation 2 Silent Hill 2 Remake. Next category we have is that one people get real anal about, faithfulness to the original. Now, I'm not one of those people that gets butthurt and pissed off if every single solitary thing is not from the original to the end. I wasn't the guy getting mad at incinerator nades from Resident Evil 4 was not in Resident Evil 4 Remake. However, I understand the difference when you have things like Clock Tower and Gravedigger from Resident Evil 3 not being in the remake. So how does Resident Evil 2 Remake shape up? Once again, for the most part, it follows faithfully to the original game, but the biggest thing that it ultimately suffers from, in my opinion, is not having the zapping system. And that honestly killed a lot of the playthroughs. It killed a lot of the scenarios, having multiple scenarios, giving you a reason to basically play the game multiple times. The first and second run have basically no purpose, because its only difference is who gets to the RPD first and who fights Birkin at the end. So they already messed out on that. And also, rest in peace, spiders, as well as a few other enemies. I really wish it could have made it to the final cut. With Silent Hill 2 Remake, it, for the most part, basically stays completely true beat for the story. I mean, there's really nothing I could say that really heavily deviates from it. There are some minor ways in terms of how scenes play out, but ultimately it's not like I can really name something that's significantly missing from the main story that I'm saying, damn, I wish this was here, wish it wasn't here, or wish they did it really better than that. Ultimately, the story is basically beat for beat just about the same. There's some minor differences in how scenes play out, some maybe little dialogue changes, but nothing as egregious as what was missing from Resident Evil 2 Remake in terms of what it didn't have. But the irony is this category is a no-brainer, because even if Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil 2 Remake followed beat for beat everything, and Resident Evil 2 Remake had a zapping system, and Silent Hill followed everything beat for beat, they were both going to lose this category easily to Dead Space Remake. Why, you might ask? Well, it's pretty obvious. Dead Space Remake is the only one of these three that actually follows basically everything. And what I mean by everything, I'm talking about in terms of how you play the game. Both Silent Hill 2 Remake and Resident Evil 2 Remake both changed from their original camera to over-the-shoulder, while Dead Space Remake stuck with the over-the-shoulder. So, by default, it was going to win this category nonetheless. But it also sticks beat to beat with the stories. There's a few, quality of life enhancements, but anything changing basically how the story goes and how everything is presented. So, ultimately, this is a point and a win for Dead Space Remake. So that's 1 point for Dead Space Remake and 1 point for Silent Hill 2 Remake. We now move on to our next category, which is going to be new additions. We'll stick here with Dead Space Remake, and in terms of new additions, I wanted to focus on the things that really mattered in the main story, like actually something new and different. And the biggest substantial difference is, as I said, Dead Space Remake is pretty faithful to the original game, but maybe a little bit too much faithfulness, because its biggest difference basically is that whole side quest that involves Nicole, basically following her around and giving some more insight. And I do like that, and I'm happy it made it into this game, but you're going to see a trend with this whole category. I wish there was something else, something really remember, because as I said, while that side quest is nice, it's not like we're going to be writing home about it for years to come. And I'll give you a perfect example, that one that I think everyone can relate to. So ultimately, yeah, while it is new, it's not the new thing I want, but let's move on to Silent Hill 2 Remake. And while Silent Hill 2 Remake's biggest addition would probably be either the two endings, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I think my problem is that the endings are they're not hard to get and unlock, and I'll admit, I don't think there's as substantial as they already put their endings, but they're alright. The other thing is they added a lot more longevity to the game. The games are a lot longer. They had a lot more exploration into towns. But someone made a real good comment a few weeks ago, and I do agree with it because I didn't understand it at first. But it's like you add so much more length to the game, but you didn't add a certain other thing in the game. And I think that's where I'm starting to get to this trend, which you're about to see here. And that is, I wish they could have added maybe a new or different enemy type to basically make that game being longer a lot more substantial, because just playing against the same enemies over time can kind of get a little bit repetitive. But now we go over to Resident Evil 2 Remake, which, as I said before, in terms of its faithfulness, it did cut out a lot of enemies, but it didn't really add anything new. Yes, technically you say they added the enemies from the whole, I believe what was it called, Ghost Survivors mode, but that's kind of like a whole add-on mode that came after the game's release. I was more comparing it to the main campaigns in the game. I just wish there was something there to possibly replace it. And I think that's where I get to this category, is that, like, while I do like some of the minor new things, I just feel like all three games kind of missed the mark in terms of, like, here's an example no one needs an introduction for. Resident Evil 1 Remake, while a lot of people still consider it the greatest remake of all time, it had Lisa, Trevor, and the Crimson Heads in there. Two iconic enemies that no one is ever going to forget, and they mattered, and they mean something. That's what I think all three of these games really miss. So in terms of who gets a point in this category, in terms of new additions, I kind of think they all struck out. So yeah, no one's going to get a point in this category, unfortunately. We now move on to the next one. Replayability. As I said, being able to play a survival horror game multiple times, I think, is a big thing. And I think the more you play a survival horror game, the more popular and beloved it is. If it's one of those games where it's like, one and done, I don't think it's going to have as much staying power, considering, other games you can keep coming back on and maybe trying to increase your time and stuff like that. With Dead Space Remake, I think it has a lot of replayability. Obviously, you can increase your character stats. The gameplay is fun and fluent. The remake enhances a lot of the quality of life enhancements, as well as on the screen, sound design, art. There's a lot of things to go to, and I think it's really great, a fun game I can see myself playing multiple times with multiple difficulties and stuff to unlock. But ultimately, I don't think it's as replayable as other games on this list. With Silent Hill 2 Remake, I actually think it has probably the least amount of replayability compared to the other two. Not that it doesn't have good replay value, it does, but compared to Dead Space and Resident Evil 2 Remake, I think it's the one that's going to come in last place with this. And I think the length of the game actually hurts it a little bit. As I said, going back to the new additions, I think the lack of new additions in terms of things that really matter, like new enemies in the game or doing some unique concept, instead of just making things longer, just so they can make them longer, I think kind of hurt the game's replayability chances. But overall, I still think it's a game you come back and play multiple times, but I wish there was more, things to unlock, things that are substantial, and things to go through than just having it be the way it is. But still, it is going to come in last place in this category. With Resident Evil 2 Remake, it's kind of ironic because I mentioned earlier that it messed up not having the zapping system, which killed, its replayability. But even without that, it's still head and shoulders got more replayability than the other two games, just because of having dual campaigns and having, multiple ways to play, but also the structure of how it's generated. It's why it's one of the most fun speed running games out there. You can constantly playing it, increasing your time, doing different types of runs, having a lot of things to unlock. It's like the perfect type of game, the perfect replayability. I think Resident Evil games have a high replayability. It's one of the things that makes them so addicting and constantly keep playing them over and over. It's why so many people like doing randomizers on there. So even without the zapping system, which is scary to think about it, can you imagine if they had the zapping system? It would have easily walked away with it. But even without it, it still kind of easily walks away with it. So the point of replayability goes to Resident Evil 2 Remake. But I know what you're thinking. Hey, we're all tied up. We got one more category left to decide a winner. So without further ado, let's get to the last one, which is Challenge. Now with Challenge, here's what I was looking for, because I wanted to explain this a little bit more, okay? I'm not necessarily talking about, is it the most toughest, brutal game in the world, because everyone's different. It's a very subjective thing. Some people find things more challenging than others. What I was looking for is, which game offers that one thing I look for in every survival horror game and get really bummed out when it's not there. And that is having that hard difficulty that you have to unlock, or maybe you have to do it in a certain time frame without saving as many times. Something like that you need to do to unlock the hardest and most requested items in game, whether it's like a special super weapon or infinity ammo or maybe just a cool cosmetic, something like that. Something that makes you want to go through hell to unlock it and the ultimate satisfaction when you do. I start here with Silent Hill 2 Remake first because unfortunately it's the one that's going to be in last place in this category and by a mile, because I made a video a few weeks ago talking about my biggest problem with the remake, and it's the fact it's too damn easy. I mean, my first time I died in this game was 40 hours into the game, and basically I died in a dual pyramid head fight for pretty much trying to do a melee only run on the hardest difficulty just so I can get one of those trophies, and that was my first death. And didn't take too many tries to redeem myself and eventually get through it. It's just there's no challenge in just beating the game, but also there's no highest difficulty mode where you can unlock that super really rare valued item or just that thing to show off or that super weapon. And I really think this game needs an update like that badly to put it on a lot fair, even playing field compared to the other two, because that's something I really look for in every survival horror game, and Silent Hill 2 Remake unfortunately really lacks that severely. We now move on to Dead Space Remake, and fortunately for Dead Space Remake, it does have that in the impossibility mode. Basically, it's a mode that's really hard to do. Permadeath mode, you can't die, and if you do able to complete it and beat the game, you're able to unlock the finger foam cannon, and I like doing that. As I said, it's pretty challenging, for a normal playthrough, first time you ever played the game. But on possibility mode, just always having that whole fear of, if I mess up one time, I got to start all the way back from the beginning. And I do think it gets easier the more you play through it. It's just hard to start these things. And I think that's a common trend for a lot of these things. It's hard to get off to a good start. But once you get off to a good start, it is satisfying, a lot more possible. But make no mistake, this whole challenge thing, it's real. Because is it any surprise to any of you guys that my two most watched videos of all time are ironically doing impossibility mode on Dead Space Remake and Resident Evil 4 Remake getting professional S+ ranking. But we're not here talking about Resident Evil 4 Remake. We're here talking about Resident Evil 2 Remake. So how does it do its challenge? And it does it, in my opinion, the overall best. Now, it does have one slight advantage the other two can't compensate for. It does have two campaigns. So I like the fact that how it runs its challenge. But basically, you play on the hardest difficulty, and if you're able to get an S+ ranking on both the hardest difficulty with Leon and Claire, you unlock the super weapons, infinite ammo, the Gatling gun, and basically the quad launcher. And I like that because both of them are very challenging. You have to understand how the map flows. You have to know where to go. You have to be mindful of how much damage things can take. You have to be mindful of your saves because you only save a few times. So there's a lot of parameters you have to have built in your head. And to me, you have to invest a lot of your time to complete this thing. But I'll tell you one thing right now. If you do complete this thing, it is the ultimate satisfaction. And that's the feeling I love to have. Similar to when I did an S+ ranking on RE4 Remake. It's the same way I felt with RE2 Remake. When I finally got my first S+ ranking on the hardest difficulty, it was the ultimate satisfaction. I think that's one thing Resident Evil games have always thrived in, is I like doing these hard difficulties, getting those S+ rankings, and it feels ultimately satisfying. They're not easy. You got to know what you're doing, and you got to have a lot of trial and error and a lot of, getting mad, getting pissed off, getting BS'd a lot of times. But when you finally do overcome it, I think more than any of the other games, even though they're great too, nothing gives a satisfaction like overcoming that challenge in Resident Evil 2 Remake. And that's why I ultimately give Resident Evil 2 Remake the ultimate advantage. But once again, that's not to say that the other two games are that far behind in terms of how I view and how I like them. I like both of them. I like all three of them altogether. I think they all have their things they excel at, things they maybe could do a little bit better. They all three could have improved on a lot of things, but they all three are great games. I'm happy to play all three of them, and I can't wait to see what each of their franchises can bring to the table for years to come. I'm happy that we can have these remakes of all these classic games brought back, and I like the fact that I can play both versions of them and enjoy both versions of them. But, once again, this was just me basically giving you my subjective opinion, and that's the key word, subjective, because it's just how I feel. Because how I view and place differences on different things, it's different for every person. And that's why, as I say, it's my opinion. I like to hear your guys' opinion. How do you feel about each of these three remakes? Which one is your personal favorite? Which one really resonated and stood out to you? How would you rank them personally? And let me know your reasons why, like which things gave you the extra advantage, or which things you think resonated more with you or you liked. Which changes did you like? Which changes didn't you like? As I said, I like to have a fruitful conversation and hear different people's perspectives on this, because I think all three of them really did a huge justice to a lot of these things. They're not perfect. I think there are things they could all improve upon, but I'm definitely not ashamed to play either one of these threes. But as I said, let me know how you guys would rank these things, and also what categories would you personally use. As I did my 5 categories, try to keep out story, characters, and the gameplay, just because I was trying to make it as fair as possible. Because if we analyze gameplay, I think Silent Hill 2 Remake is probably going to come in last place in that, compared to, stomping on people and Dead Space Remake and blowing up zombies' heads in Resident Evil 2 Remake. But vice versa, if I had to analyze story and characters, obviously Silent Hill 2 Remake is probably going to win hands down with how deep their characters are. But there's no right way to do this. There's no right, there's no wrong way. That was my point. As I said, everyone's different. I want to hear you guys' differences, so don't be shy. Hey, and if you got to write a whole bunch of text and paragraph, you go ahead and do it. I'll try to read as much as I can and try to give you my honest takes on how I feel about that stuff. I like to hear your takes as well. But that is going to be it. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this little, I guess, Remake 3 comparison between all three of them. Hopefully you guys can enjoy, maybe not enjoy as much as this zombie here, because I'm not going to lie, that just... that brings Booty Bandit to a whole new different level of reality. But that's going to be it. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video, and hopefully I can see you guys back in the next one. Thanks, and I'll see you all later. Peace.